and welcome back once again, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of The Save Point. And as you people may notice, my usual co-host is not here today, but we have a very, very special guest with us today. I am so honored and proud to have Steve Ince joining me on this episode of The Save Point. Steve Ince is a writer, artist, games designer, consultant, and speaker for narrative-driven games, along as a novelist for his comic book series, which we will deep dive into rather soon. But Steve, great to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, and many thanks for the invite. It's always a pleasure to talk to people who are interested in the sort of games that I develop. So yes, thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. And let's dive deep into this. 1993 was a great year for you, I believe.
Yeah, I got a job.
Hired by a little company called Revolution, which are...
Yeah, I vaguely remember them. Yes, it was a great opportunity to join a company that was at the time very small. I mean, I think it had 6 people in the company, and I joined about the same time as another guy, so that made us 8. So it was cozy, it was interesting, and sort of very new to me. I hadn't kind of worked in games prior to that, so yeah, it's fabulous.
Yeah, and this was the company who were also involved with Beneath a Steel Sky, and the actual Beneath a Steel Sky franchise has kind of resurged in recent years. They brought out the sequel there not too long ago for the PlayStation. I haven't had a chance to play it myself, although I have played the original Beneath the Steel Sky. But I suppose what I want to talk to you about more, which is where the kind of the meat of the video is going to be going. You worked as a producer for Broken Sword, and as you can see by the background behind me here, Broken Sword is one of my favorite games of all time. I really, really must elaborate that as clearly as I can. It is, to me, it's a masterpiece in narrative gaming. It was one of the first titles that introduced me as a young player to that type of narrative. So I'd like to talk to you a little about the production behind Broken Sword. If you wouldn't mind just telling me what the actual what was the storyboard like in the early days of Broken Sword? Because what was the end product? Was that always the way it was? Was it blueprinted that way, or did stuff get changed along the way?
Oh, a lot got changed.
Yeah.
When I joined the company in 93, we were still in the middle of developing Beneath the Steel Sky and putting that together. So I was doing an awful lot of work on that, but I also was doing some initial background work for Broken Sword, which we were planning to do more or less exactly the same as Steel Sky. And then, sort of like technology was advancing, monitors were getting better, sort of like monitors were jumping up from 320 wide to 640 wide. So, we thought that, we needed to move. So it kind of like progressed from there, really. And we realized very quickly that it was going to be a huge game in terms of the resources that we would use, a lot bigger than Beneath the Steel Sky. So, I got called into the office one day by Charles Cecil, who's obviously the boss of Revolution.
The Grand Master himself.
And, sort of, I honestly thought, sort of I'd done something, I was in trouble. And he said, because this project is so big, it needs a producer, and you're it.
Oh, wow.
So I was sort of like suddenly promoted to producer, which was
it intimidating?
Great honor, and it was a great opportunity as well, because it meant that I was working directly with just about everybody in the team. Sort of like making sure that we were all seeing the same vision and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to learn, a lot more about how games are put together from that producer role than probably I would have done otherwise.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic to kind of like get that opportunity and kind of like deliver both the first two Broken Sword games in that role. So yeah, it was just fantastic. But a lot of work, and a lot of work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you say that it was a lot of work for everybody, the first thing that I immediately can see in front of me is like the scene is playing out whenever I talk about Broken Sword 1 is the opening sequence, as a matter of fact, where you hear George Stobart coming through. He was masterfully voiced by Rolf Saxon. I mean, I couldn't imagine another voice actor who could do George Stobart to justice like what Rolf performed. He's a tremendous actor on stage as well. He does some fantastic work. But it's when you hear Paris in the fall, the last months of the year, at the end of the millennium, the city holds many memories for me of cafes, of music, of love, and of death. And then it cuts almost like this first-person perspective where it's like you're looking through like a telescope or a fisheye lens. And that wonderful opening scene where you're just looking at Paris and you hear Barrington Phelan's little orchestral score coming through, that opening melody of da, 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 and there's this great thrill happening, and we sit down at where the cafe of De La Chambre des Verts is with the young American George Stobart just minding his own business, and you see the killer clown approaching, and it kind of opens up this game like, what is going on here? But I must say, for a game that came out around that time that it did, when you as the player exit the opening scene and George pulls away the tarp of the outside kind of umbrella part of the cafe, the first thing that you hear him say officially in the game is, as I picked myself up, all I could hear was the senseless drone of traffic around me. Life was moving on around me, but the explosion would change my life forever. And it almost puts the player into this perspective where you are being put into this living, breathing world where life is moving on around you. And it's brilliant because as the player, you're like, well, what do I do? Like, do I go back into the cafe and, search for any survivors? I know you go and you talk to the waitress who is suffering from shell shock. You go and you see Plantar there, who unfortunately was killed in the explosion. But that opening sequence, could you just talk me through how even George's walk cycle was written? I know he walks in almost like an 8 kind of step stage where one foot can seamlessly cross over the other. It's rather organic for the technology that you had at the time. Was it tricky to get this done so seamlessly, or was it kind of you had such a good team behind you that you could trust them to do such a good job at it? Could you talk me through the process there?
One of the things that we wanted is that we wanted the characters to scale. So as George moves around, kind of as he goes into the background of these scenes, he gets smaller. And, sort of, at first it seems like a simple task. We just make the character smaller. But, it wasn't just the case that he got smaller. His footsteps had to get smaller as well. And a lot of companies who were trying to scale characters were forgetting that. So, sort of like, they just seemed to slide because the feet didn't appear to be glued to the ground, sort of when they were walking. And the beauty of it was that we, sort of like we scaled the size, we scaled the size of the footsteps, so everything was kind of like working together. But the actual animation set for George, because it was so complex, the basic set, that's not counting all the specific animations of things like, opening the lid of the dustbin in the alley and things like this. Just the basic set had 450 frames of animation for the 8 directions of walk, sort of like all the different turns, because he could turn off any foot. Sort of if you think that 8 directions, if you like, say you're going at a 45-degree angle away from the camera, then he has to turn off his left foot left and his right foot left, and his left foot right, and his right foot right, and then sort of, and that has to kind of smoothly turn into the next warp cycle. You see, so it was kind of like, not only did the animator have to create all these different animations, a wonderful guy called Steve Ince, a brilliant animator.
Oh, absolutely fantastic!
And he's completely self-taught as well. He taught himself to animate on an Amiga, which is fantastic. And
Brilliant.
sort of, he could just pick the stuff up. If somebody showed him something, he'd kind of take that on board. And he did a lot of research, watching people walk and filming people walk and stuff like this, just to get the kind of because we wanted
organic kind of movement, right?
Yeah, we wanted George's basic movements to be realistic. It was a stylized realism, because obviously he looked a bit cartoony and stuff, and the backgrounds are very hand drawn. But his movement was for the most part quite realistic. And this warp time, and sort of like basic things like sort of relaxing in a stand pose and running his fingers through his hair, it all added to that thing. But the actual walking was sort of like he does kind of like this on frames 61, 62 and 63, so we had this, so you had to create this huge lookup table for the programmers to actually sort of be able to pull the right frames at the right point in his turns and walks and stuff like this. So it was quite a complex thing.
Yeah.
But kind of I don't think anybody else has done anything like that.
Well, you guys were striving for with the utilities and the equipment that you had in Revolution at the time. You really were doing the best that you could do with what was given to you at the time. And I must say, for a game of its time, it holds up remarkably well nowadays. I know the HD re-releases happened in 2009, 2010, and we'll touch on those briefly later on in the video. But I suppose the vanilla game as it was and how it is now, granted, it can look a little bit blurry at some points, just a very, very small point in the actual game itself. But you guys were striving for something at this time that you wanted to give the best possible product for the utilities that you were giving at the time. The question I want to ask you though, Steve, is obviously we didn't have the internet back in like what we have now, like the search engines that we have now and the vast amounts of information at our fingertips. When you were putting together the actual Paris aesthetic, so to speak, and this can even be said for Lochmarne in the Ireland location, or the Vasconcelos manor in Spain, going to Marib in Syria, even going to Bannockburn in Scotland. It's very there's a lot kind of going on in the game. How did you get your inspiration for these certain type of locations? Because Paris is your hub essentially. But for going even out, or even rather, we could talk about inside Paris. Where did you get your inspiration from? You obviously must have went to a load of libraries. Did you employ any other artists from the outside in from? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean the backgrounds were created by a couple of guys who were actually who used to work years ago at the Don Bluth Studios in Ireland, and they were fantastic. Couple of guys, Eoin Cale and Neil Breen, and they were brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant, and especially Eoin. I mean, he just had so much experience, and so because you've got all this experience and knowledge and stuff like this, I mean, his kind of like reference libraries. I mean, must have had hundreds of books and all sorts of things. So it wasn't, and also, sort of like Charles was always going to Paris regularly, sort of, and sort of like he had friends and relatives out there, I think, so it was quite easy for him to get some specific photographic reference, and so we built that up, and then obviously, sort of places like Syria, where you sort of, you maybe don't have any sort of like personal contacts there. There are lots of kind of like books with reference and stuff like this. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but it was certainly possible. And I think that sort of without libraries and without people owning books and having basically a basic knowledge of drawn from their experience, many years working in sort of like drawing backgrounds for traditional animation, you wouldn't have that sort of like quality that we ended up with, really.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those locations, sort of like the opening one, the outside the cafe, that first game location there. I mean, it just sums up an autumn day in Paris in many respects. But then, you go to Syria, sort of like, and when you're going out to the Bull's Head, and you've got that opening scene where it kind of like pans up, sort of, and then sort of we see the appearance of George, at the end of that, and it's just, sort of like the colouring and, the just the feel of it is tremendous. And I think the background guys who drew those and the other guys who coloured them have just done a fantastic job. And sort of like when you kind of look back and you realise that, well, I was part of that game.
Yeah.
Sort of, and I, in a sense, I had a big part in it, but at the same time, so did a number of other people. The background artists were, a huge part of making it look good. The colorists, the animators in particular, sort of, and the programming team were just phenomenal. Kind of being able to kind of pull all that together. And then, of course, the writers, Dave Cummins and Jonathan Howard did a fantastic job just getting the tone of the dialogue so good throughout.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned earlier, sort of like Rolf Saxon was just fantastic as George, and sort of I couldn't imagine him being voiced by anybody else. It's just the right kind of dryness to George's humor, and the level of irony and sarcasm and stuff,
aloofness as well, right?
Yeah, he's just brilliant. Of course, Rolf is just a fantastic guy as well.
Yeah,
he's a real pleasure to talk to and be with and stuff. So, when you're in the studio with him, recording the voices, sort of nothing's, sort of like a problem for him. I mean, the certain times when, sort of we all broke down in fits of giggles and stuff like this. And, I think it's just the nature, somebody reads a line wrongly or something like this, and that's it for 5 or 10 minutes. But that just helps the process, I think, because sort of it stops it being too serious. And you didn't want George to be too serious, even though he's confronted by quite serious things at times, and sort of threatened with death on occasion.
Well, that's very true, and I think I'm just going to highlight that point now. It was something that I was going to bring up. I've actually had a conversation with Charles. There's a Facebook group just called Broken Sword. It's a private group, and people post memes and things like that. And I actually started off this little trending thing. I called it Broken Secrets, that kind of thing, where I was kind of looking for little Easter eggs in the games and things like that. And Charles had commented on a thread that I had started where he said that the dialogue between George and, let's say, Rosso, or the dialogue between George and, let's say, Andrei Lobino, the script was already kind of written, but there was a lot of freedom given to the voice actors at the time, wasn't there? Where they kind of just went with it. And that kind of, it didn't seem like they were just reciting something from a piece of paper. They were kind of including their own little idiosyncrasies or their own little traits here and there. But there's a part in Broken Sword 1, and to this day, I mean, when I've played the game multiple times, And I'm just going to go back to a point that you made when you're in Syria and you go to the Bull's Head. And I suppose this is where we get our first real sense of, oh dear, this is not right. Now, there had been a point in the Hotel Ubu when you have to take the manuscript page and kind of climb out Khan's window and throw it down into the alleyway because Flap and Guido are waiting for you outside. And if they search you all the time when you go out, thinking that you might have something that would benefit them or something that they're looking for. And it's actually, you can die at this part of the game if they do find the manuscript on you. So that's rather tense as it is, because you're kind of stuck in this building and your only way out is through the front door. But how do I get out of the front door with the manuscript still intact? How do I do this? But there's a part in the center part of the game when you go to the Bull's Head, and you are hunting down one of the Neo-Templars called Klausner. And you go into this cave, and the animation was so seamlessly done when George has to almost put his hand into this rock formation and he grabs hold of a ring and he pulls something and a secret doorway opens and you go in. And especially how the camera work was at the time, how it was almost like one seamless transition. The way that the cave is structured is almost like an upside down C. It's rather curvy. And as George is walking, a little bit of text comes up and says, "Around the corner, I saw the body." And then the camera slowly paves across and you see the remains of the Neo-Templar, Klausner, he's obviously died due to starvation or dehydration or one of those. And then behind you, the door closes, the secret entryway closes and you're stuck. And it's like, oh, what do I do? So you search Klausner and you find a lens that he has in his jacket, and then the door opens behind you. And I believe George says, "My God, that must be Ultar, who is the driver from Mareed who got you to the Bull's Head in the first place." And George shouts, "Ultar, stay where you are. It's a trap. Don't come in." And as he's running towards the entrance, Khan greets him. And this is the same man who has been tracking you down. He knows every step you've taken. Your first real encounter with this man is in Lochmarn after Sean Fitzgerald gets run over in a sports car. And I believe the teenage boy outside the cafe says he was dressed like a bloody pixie. But Khan greets you and says, "This is it. This is the end." For a game that was so heavily driven by the narrative between the characters, this one part in the game is so action heavy without there being explosions and big bullets going off and everything, and it's nothing like that. It's a confrontation between these two characters where it can only go one way. And I must commend the script writers, the voice actors especially, just that one scene. It's so tense. It's brilliant. Do you remember that? Like, how did you go about doing that scene itself? Like, did you sit down with Charles and Rolf and the other actors involved and did you say, okay, here's what it is, this is what we're aiming for, here's how we want it to go? Or was it a more organic process?
Well, in a sense, the development of the game is a long process, and you get most of it done. In fact, probably 99% of it done before you even consider recording the dialogue, because you got to test it out. So we knew how the whole thing was playing out before we ever recorded the voices. Because things can change. You don't want to be calling actors in to do pickups and stuff like that. If you can avoid it, occasionally you get this. But most of the time, we've been very good. Back then, we were very good at kind of really testing until we got to a point that we regarded the text as locked down, and then we would go and record it. And so basically we knew what it was. We knew what the situation was through the whole of that section. Well, in fact, the whole game. But so you come to record and it's really about working with the actors and saying, this is what happens. You've got to give us, the best you can within that, And so, George is, being held at gunpoint, and, sort of it's, does he give in to the Khan, or does he try something desperate? And I think that is the beauty of working with good actors who can deliver these different options to you in the right tone, and they work with the script in a very good way. Yes, there are times when sometimes, well, if we try it a bit like this, or how about we shorten that line to this, or something like this, and sort of, it's always worth listening to actors in those situations because they've got so much experience. But sometimes sort of you've just got to, they understand that they've got to go with what's written, and thankfully the whole of that section was written so well, and rewritten, sort of, and I think that was the strength, sort of, we knew what we kind of wanted from that, and the actors delivered, because they were complete professionals, and just knew what they were doing.
I think for me, when I'm just going and replaying that sequence, there's like what you said, when Khan kind of has George at gunpoint, and there's this leap kind of looking down onto Oltar's, he calls it a taxi, but it's like an old army truck.
Yeah.
But what I really enjoyed about that scene was, you have to pay really close attention to what Khan is asking you. And it's almost when he asks you a question, there's two little avatars that come up. One is George with angel wings, and one is George with the devil's horns and the tail. One is tell the truth, tell a lie. But Khan knows George inside and out now at this stage. It's almost like he's a vulture just circling over him. And you have to tell the truth to this man, because he knows already what the answer is going to be. And it's that moment when Khan says, I would like to shake your hand. And you have a 20-second gap or so when you have to go into the inventory to choose the electroshock buzzer that the costume guy had given you in Paris. It's the only time that you use this thing. You shock Khan, George plants him one, and then jumps off, and his fall is broken by Oltar's tarp in his Jeep. There's a lot of moments like that in Broken Sword 1 where I feel like the player has to act really quickly, but you have to pay attention to the surroundings that's going on with you. And what I can only commend the artists about how they drew things in the background. A great example is when you're in the Museum Kroon, the Museum de Kroon, where you have to hide in a sarcophagus that night, and you open the door. You have to get at the tripod that's in the that's protected in this glass case. And Flap and Guido are looking for the exact same thing. They managed to break into the building, but you have to drop a totem pole onto the actual the glass casing to set the alarm off.
Yeah.
But it's funny because if you don't choose the right thing, Guido will immediately just shoot you straight away, and that's how you die, basically. It's one of the death screens that you can get. Was it difficult to write those quick time events with the technology that you were given at the time?
No, not really. Sort of, because sort of it's basically you're just creating a timer, right? Sort of at this point, set a timer for 10 seconds or something like this, and if at the end of that 10 seconds George hasn't done the right thing, then he gets shot, and it's basically as simple as that. Sort of, and a lot of I mean, there's obviously an awful lot going on with the engine. I mean, the development of the engine has to run all this stuff. It has to run the animations properly. It has to run the sort of like get everything in the right place. Right. So I'm not trying to undermine the engine. I mean, the programmers did a fantastic job on the engine and how everything was put in place. But the logic itself is very straightforward. It's kind of like, sort of George creeps out of the sarcophagus, and then he's got however long to do the correct thing.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you get shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is really just a case of setting a timer, sort of, and checking that before that timer goes off, that he has, or the player has made the right choice
Mm-hmm.
for George to do this thing. So sort of the defining all the animations and the sort of like the programmers getting all that kind of stuff to work. That's the hard thing. The logic itself is relatively straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing about sort of a lot of these things. With adventure game development in particular, if you have a good engine that supports the logic and stuff like this very well, and supports the animations and supports the dialogue and stuff like this, kind of like when it actually comes to put all this stuff together by the writers and the implementers, sort of it should be relatively straightforward. That's not to say you can't have bugs, and you might have sort of a number of things going on at the same time, which complicates things. But sort of it shouldn't, sort of the programmers, if they're worth the salt, will do the heavy lifting, and then it's all about creating content. And one of the beauties of a game like Broken Sword is that we can put so much content in because the programmers had done such a great job with the engine, and that gave, and the tools to implement the game, of course. So sort of like the writers and implementers could just, sort of like do a fantastic job. Oh yeah, we've got this background screen, we've got these, sort of like objects within it. You need to define that, sort of here's a door that opens, and sort of George can knock on this door, and somebody will come to the door, or and it's it's just about. I mean, it becomes big and complex. The scripts for it are big, but they're readable, they're understandable, and sort of just the way that everything is came together just makes it, sort of not the difficult task it would otherwise be, shall we say?
Yeah. I mean,
and I think that, I mean, when it comes down to it, I mean, tools are so important within game development. Sort of, it's all right having a brilliant engine, but if you haven't got the tools to kind of put the stuff into the engine, like the backgrounds have got to be in the right format, and sort of like, particularly with a game like Broken Sword, where we had a lot of parallax scrolling, sort of like the backgrounds are larger than a single screen, so they would scroll, and then you'd maybe have something in the foreground that was larger, so that it would scroll faster to give that sense of depth, and that's a traditional animation trick. And so we were kind of like using all this traditional animation stuff to kind of make these locations rich and have depth and stuff like this, and that worked very well. But the engine and the tools have to support that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I rambled a bit there.
No. This is what this is for, and the more you talk, the better, my friend. I think for a game like Broken Sword, we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the video, where George he can be rather aloof at sometimes and rather clumsy. But there's a moment actually in Broken Sword 1, and Broken Sword 2 kind of touches on this a little bit as well, and we will get to that now in a moment. But there's a part in Broken Sword 1 where this really hit me. It really hit me. It's a part where, now, as we kind of discussed, Paris is kind of like your hub area where you kind of can go back to at your leisure, and you can interact with different characters. The roads workman is there. You can go to Montfaucon and you can talk to the gendarme there. You can go to the police station where you have a conversation with Sergeant Moo, the other police officer, and Rosso. But this is the second, this location is you visit it twice, and it's in Spain. But I'm kind of homing in on the second time you go there. The Countess in the beginning is really standoffish against you. Like, she's rather cold because she is the last of her bloodline, essentially. And she doesn't really trust George and why he's here. And the gardener doesn't like him. Lopez, I think his name is. But the first time that you complete a sequence there where you find a chalice hidden in a mausoleum, she kind of opens up a little bit more to you, and she's a little bit more brighter and things like that. When you go to have this conversation with the Countess in her parlor or her room, or it's one of the places in the manor that she has, there's a chess set, and one of the pieces is missing. And she talks about how one of her ancestors, who was a Knights Templar, his children had gone missing after he took out his sword and his shield and went off to fight the Holy Crusade. His children had gone missing, and they had taken this chess piece with them. And George kind of asks, well, why don't you just get a replacement? And the Countess, I can't really remember the line of dialogue that she says, but she's kind of a little bit like, you don't understand why this is so significant to my family. But the second time that you go to the actual Countess's manor, you go down this well, and there's almost like a doorway, a stone doorway with a partition of the Countess Della, whatever her second name is. It's like a coat of arms, and the door falls down, and it's like a quick time event. If you don't move out of the way, you get crushed. But when you move out of the way, you can go into this room, and you see the remains of the children. And one of them is holding the chess piece, which is the rook or the king or whatever piece it is. And George goes up to visit the Countess again. And he says, you'll no longer need to replace that piece. And he just puts it down on the chessboard itself. And she recoils in horror. And in that one little scene, how the animation was done, how beautifully it was voiced. It was that one moment where it was like, this is really beautiful. There's something human going on here. And it was just that interaction between those characters that was just absolutely, it was fantastic. It's one of my favorite moments of Broken Sword 1. And it's a 30-second conversation that George has with the Countess. And it's so organic. And it's so just, it's beautiful to watch, given that the circumstances are rather dark. But then when you have the conversations with Nico in her apartment, it doesn't even seem like the actors are reading a script. It's more like they're just bouncing off each other. So coming into Broken Sword 2, as a producer, did you find that you were kind of, were you trying to improve on what had been done before? As it is a sequel, are you trying to kind of up the game a little bit in terms of the dialogue, the art style? How did that process start?
Well, with Broken Sword 2, Virgin, who were the publisher of the first one, wanted the sequel within a year, and that was an awful lot to do within a year. So we actually started designing the game before Broken Sword 1 was finished. In order to kind of like get everyone hitting the ground running as soon as the first one. Yeah. All right, the first one's finished. You're on to the next one.
Yeah, very quick.
So I mean, there were certain things that we reused, like George's walk set was fundamentally the same. I mean, he has a different coloured jacket, but that was just like a palette change for the sprites, basically. But there was some additional stuff put into it, just to improve a few things here and there. So there were slight tweaks on that. But sort of like there were, because we had less time, it wasn't such an involved story in some respects, and the gameplay wasn't quite as rich, perhaps, because sort of like as you mentioned before, Paris was the hub, and you kept going back to Paris, before it, sort of like finally making a final trip to Scotland for the sort of like ending of the game.
Yeah.
But with Broken Sword 2, it just felt as though it was just, you were just constantly moving forward,
More linear, perhaps.
Stuff like that.
More linear.
So it wasn't. I don't think it was worse in terms of a sequel so much, because sort of a lot of people loved it. A lot of people even preferred it to number one, surprisingly. But I think that if we'd have been given more time, I think we'd have done a much better game. From a writing point of view, from sort of a design point of view, and that's not to sort of say it's a bad game. It's just sort of given a bit more time, we could have done something even better.
That was actually the first Broken Sword game that I played. I had gotten it in a do you remember the old PlayStation magazines? And they give you a demo. Well, this was the demo that I played for Broken Sword. My first Broken Sword experience was when you're in the docks section of Marseille, and a little text kind of comes on where George says, he kind of gives a brief kind of overview of what's happened to lead to this point, and it was I believe it was specifically written for the demo, because it doesn't appear in the final game. It's a completely different thing that comes up in the actual the main release. But that was my first introduction to Broken Sword, was playing this part, and it took me ages to actually like use the dog biscuits on the security guard's dog to get him onto the platform over the water, where you use the hook to dunk him in, and then you jump over the fence itself. And I must say, as much as I love Broken Sword, Steve, that goat puzzle in Broken Sword 1.
Yeah.
26 years on, Steve, and it still frustrates me. In a good way, though. In a good way.
Yeah.
Like, what the well do I do here? How do I do this?
This was an interesting lesson for us. But we just didn't foresee the problems at all. And I'll tell you what the issue is. And the issue is that up until this point, George had never run. He never run, I think.
That's right, actually, yeah.
He clicked on the screen and he walked over there, and that's it. So, sort of, what would lead you to think that if you clicked somewhere in this location, that he would run? And yet he did.
Yeah.
You click on that old bit of farm machinery, and suddenly he runs over there, moves it out the way, or moves it into a different position, and suddenly the goat gets tangled up on it. And and that was the problem. People weren't making that connection in a logical manner, because nothing had led them to thinking that way up to that point.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, oh yeah. But there's another problem where people got stuck. Not quite as badly, but in Marib, where you've got the kebab seller.
Oh, the toilet brush. Oh.
Yeah, we're using the toilet brush.
To baste the kebabs, yeah.
Yeah. You actually have to right click on the toilet brush to examine it in order to see what it is.
Yeah.
And no other point in the game where you're forced to examine something in order to interact with it. Mm-hmm. And so there were a few people got stuck there. Not as bad as the goat puzzle, but certainly. So it's kind of like, the two lessons here is that, well, it's fundamentally the same lesson, is that, if you need to do something, then you have to set that up prior to that point.
Yeah.
And we just didn't realize that people would get stuck for what seemed to be an obvious thing to us, sort of when designing the puzzles. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but the dog in Marseille, that's actually one of my favorite puzzles in an adventure game, because it's all there. It's all, you just got to put the pieces together in the right order.
Yeah.
Sort of, and it's, so when you think about it, sort of from a design point of view, sort of, it's the perfect kind of example of designing a puzzle backwards, because the objective is to get over the fence, but you need to stop George climbing the fence. So so you have a guard dog. So you need to get rid of the guard dog. How do you get rid of the guard dog? Well, you need to dump him in the water. How do you dump him in the water? You need to put some biscuits on that platform. How do you where do you get the biscuits from? So you have, you are effectively kind of starting with your main objective and working back until, sort of everything comes together. But I mean, there's so many different bits, like getting the bottle out of the dock. Well, getting the
you have to get the fan, the boat hook, to scoop
in order to get the bottle out, and then you have to get the top of the chimney off
without burning your hands.
You need something to actually twice in the game. George can burn his hands.
He that's one of them, is the chimney, the cone on the chimney. And then I think the other time he burns his hand is when he's sliding down the rope or something like that, isn't it? And when he's
it's in the first location when he's trying to get out the bending room.
He's trying to get out.
If he touches the cupboard door, he bends his hand.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So he has to use the Nico's knickers.
The gift. The gift.
Yeah. So, but sort of. I just love the gate puzzle in Marseille. I just think it's and that character, the I can't remember the guy's name.
The night
guy
watchman.
in the Watchman. Sort of, he's just brilliant.
It's and that honestly, like for a demo, I think is a great. It's a great, example of what the game can offer when it would be released as the full title. I don't think there's any other part in Broken Sword 2 that would work as a demo. Possibly Ubier's manner when you're trying to escape the fire and you have the poisonous spider that you have to kick the bookshelf down to crush the thing, and then you have to use the poison dart to open the cabinet, which creates a mini explosion where you can get the water siphon and things like that. I just wish though, and this isn't like a decry on Broken Sword 2, far from it. I mean, I really enjoyed that game, I must say. I just wish though, and I know you guys were dealing with time constraints at the time and you needed to get a sequel out rather quickly, so you were kind of like powerhousing ahead. Like, the game was really quick. What I would have really enjoyed though was maybe a little bit more time in Paris, because I know you have a conversation with Andre at the in the cafe there in Montfaucon, and that's kind of like the only area in Paris aside from the Gliese Gallery where the art critique is. It's just me personally, I would have loved to see a little bit more time, maybe go back to Nico's place or maybe go visit the florist or things like that. But the question I want to ask you though, Steve, is Broken Sword 1 had kind of built its reputation around the Knights Templar and the mythology around these knights, and there's such a heavy mythos behind this actual crusade. Moving on from the Knights Templar to resurrecting an Aztec god, Tezcatlipoca, was this like the next stage, or was there more ideas kind of being thrown at the drawing board? Like, okay, we've done the Knights Templar, do we continue on with this? Maybe another sect? How did Tezcatlipoca come into the end process? Do you remember what that was like?
I think
much more mystical. It's a much more mystical.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like the magic is a bit more up front, doesn't it? Kind of like at the end of Broken Sword 1, you've got, sort of the Grandmaster wielding the sword and lightning flashing and stuff like this. It doesn't really go beyond that. Whereas with the second one, I suppose, you've got this guy appearing out of this mirror, effectively. Sort of, and that is a bit more extreme in terms of sort of like the fantasy element, I guess, and the magic and stuff. I think that I'm trying to remember why. I think it was something to do with this mysterious mirror that was supposed to have belonged to John Dee.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, kind of
yeah,
like
yeah.
an obsidian
It's glass or
mirror.
something, isn't it? Obsidian glass,
Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah.
and I mean, John Dee was um, connected with Queen Elizabeth I. I mean, wasn't he her, you know, sort of like spy master or something like this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but he was reputed to be dabbling in, you know, sort of alchemy and all sorts of things. Um, you know, so I think that was kind of the starting point, you know, sort of like pulling something historical, you know, because I mean that's why you go to the British Museum
As
in
Nico.
Vauxhall. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And
yeah.
wasn't this sorry to cut across you, Steve, but
No,
wasn't this this was like the introduction where you almost have two main protagonists because they're on their own individual goals here as George are going to Ketch's Landing,
hmm,
where you're hunting down, or sorry, you're not hunting down, you're gathering information about Captain Ketch, who was the famous pirateer, and he coveted the Eagle Stone, I believe it was, the three main
that's right.
stones.
Yeah,
Yeah, the three main stones that locked Tezcatlipoca in this smoking mirror was the Coyote Stone, the Eagle Stone, and the Jaguar Stone, I believe it was. We'll come back to Ketch's Landing in just a second because there's something I want to ask
probably
you.
no more than me.
It's again delighted to have you here and speaking to one of my heroes. I know this game inside out. Um, I'll come back to Ketch's Landing in just a second, though. When you were going and doing Nico's kind of mission, because she starts off in the museum in London, and then she has her sequence in the underground metro and also on the boat where the London Bridge is. When you were writing those sequences, well, before, sorry, you were writing those sequences, did you have an idea that it would be Nico's story and George's story, or did that division between the two characters happen midway through the production development? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, was there ever an idea to have two main characters?
Well, yeah, we did want that. One of the things we felt in the first game was that Nico was an important character, but she never really did her own thing. All she seemed to do was sit at a desk in her apartment and not really kind of contribute. You know, she was investigating behind the scenes in a sense, and so it was kind of important to give her a kind of, you know, sort of her own things to do. Which I think is, you know, sort of stopped the second one from being completely linear by having this kind of, you know, sort of this other protagonist, you know, doing their stuff as well, or you know, helping with the investigation, shall we say?
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that you know, she had quite a substantial part in London, didn't she? I mean, the museum, then the underground, then the boat.
Yeah.
And ending up with one of the stones.
Yeah.
But yeah, the underground was one of the best bits.
And I must say, right, that actual little Easter egg, harkening back to the days of Beneath the Steel Sky, when I think it was done in the remake, when you can actually go down the main part of the tunnel and you see Robert Foster there, wondering where Joey is, and Nico says, "Don't go near that hole in the wall. I know what's in there." And it was a very good Easter egg, to be honest with you. I really enjoyed that part. But kind of going back onto Ketch's Landing as George, I was wondering if you would finally be able to confirm for me a fan theory that has been circulating the web for years and years and years. And people in the community like myself are always like, "Oh, that can't be true." Emily Ketch, is she a ghost?
Yeah.
She's a ghost?
Yes. I think, I mean, no one actually uses the word ghost, but I mean, it's pretty clear that from what the two sisters say, that you know, right, sort of she's been dead some time.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a callback.
And also the guy in the, you know, the little kid in the boat.
Rio.
You know, he says something similar as well. You know.
Yeah.
You know.
It's that dialogue where you have to get the sisters out of George's view so he can actually get into the house. And he says, "I thought I saw a little girl there down by the beach." And the sisters look at each other and it's like, "That, what are you talking about?" And George says, "Oh, she was just down there with that little boy Rio down by the beach, and they were supposed to be best friends." And the sisters go out of the actual screen itself, and George can get into the manor or into the museum, the Ketch's museum. But I think it's that dialogue where Rio is transporting himself and George to Skull Island, where they're looking for the last remains of Captain Ketch's treasure. And George turns to Rio and says, "That Emily Ketch really asks a lot of questions." And Rio says, rest it, man. It's not funny. Like, this whole thing is not funny." And George says, what happened to her? And Rio says something along the lines of that she was a very keen hide and seek player. And the two of them were playing hide and seek, and she hid herself in Captain Ketch's treasure chest, and the only way you could open it was from the outside. But it's that dialogue with her and George when they're having that conversation. I remember playing it and just thinking, like, she's been here all this time. Like, what? Like, how is this possible? But she definitely is a ghost.
Mm.
It's been confirmed. It's been confirmed. Yes. Brilliant. It's been confirmed. Coming to the end of Broken Sword 2, when you obviously have the three stones, the three obsidian stones, and you can unlock Tezcatlipoca back into his mirror, and the world is saved, and you know George and Nico have that last hurrah and things like that. I know that Broken Sword 3 did happen in 2003, and it was kind of being more on the lines of the new generation of consoles with the Xbox and the PlayStation 3. And I know that you had done some writing for this particular title. Was it difficult when it came to Broken Sword 3 to, like, where do you go from there? You know, did you feel like you'd maybe touched on a lot of what you could have done? How difficult was it, or even if it was difficult, did you have a hard time kind of putting a plot together for Broken Sword 3?
No, not really. I mean, Charles wanted to do more with the Templars, which is fair enough. I mean, you know, sort of, we felt that you know, there were probably a lot more that we could do. But we wanted a different route in. We didn't want it to be obviously about the Templars initially. So we wanted, you know, a bit of a MacGuffin, if you like. And I was doing some research, and I was looking up, you know, sort of like some connections to both the first two games, and I was looking into John Dee again, and one of the things that I found out was that he was one of the people who was reputed to have possibly written the Voynich manuscripts.
Oh, interesting.
I've never heard of this thing. You know, so I started looking into the Voynich manuscripts and thought, this would be brilliant, because it's never been decoded, and you know, so people think, you know, nowadays people think it's some sort of hoax, but why would somebody go to such an elaborate hoax? You know, is fascinating, and the drawings are incredibly weird within it, but they know that there are something like 4 missing pages, or so they think. So that was our hook. You know, somebody got hold of the 4 missing pages, and this is key to you know, sort of like what happens in the game. You know, and they've got this you know, kind of like coder who's managed to decipher it, and particularly these 4 missing pages, and that's the, you know, kind of effectively the starting point, and then why this guy gets killed fairly early on.
Byrne, I think his name is, the character gets killed by
that's right, yes,
a Nico impersonator.
Yeah, so we have, you know, sort of so we have Nico, you know, who's obviously again, you know, a player control character separate to George, and they don't come together until, you know, sort of probably a third of the way into the game.
It's the center part of the story when it's been a while since I played the third game, but I believe it's George is in this abandoned kind of theater, and Nico and the woman impersonating her, they're kind of tackling each other on the stage, because Nico was also investigating that place, and
Yeah.
so was George. Petra, that was her name. Petra was the one. She had blonde hair. That's right, and that's where they kind of meet. But in the game itself, they're kind of doing their own thing at the moment. George is kind of being very, dare I say, Indiana Jones about how he starts his journey off in a plane that's kind of tilting over a cliff
Yeah.
for Chalmundali or something like that in the Congo, and Nico starts. That's yeah, yeah. He gets wound up about how people pronounce his name. And Nico starts her journey in Paris in Rougerie. But I suppose the question I want to ask you about Broken Sword 3 is moving on from the point and click adventure up onto this kind of 360 kind of playability for the characters. Did you find with like newest technology around the time with the PlayStation 3, I think it was on the PlayStation 3, it was on the PlayStation 3. Did you find that you had a little bit more freedom to give characters more idiosyncratic behaviors? Because like we discussed there with Broken Sword 1 and even Broken Sword 2, around that time of gaming, like there was a lot of static animations for characters. If you weren't moving them, they would just stay still. But with George especially, he would kind of run his hands through his hair, or he might fix the sleeve on his jacket. I know with Nico, she would like fix the lapels or her collar rather on her jacket in the second game. What was working with the new technology like for Broken Sword 3? And did you even run into any roadblocks at the time?
Oh, there's lots of roadblocks. I
Yeah.
think one thing that people don't appreciate is that you're using 3D, but we wanted to use it slightly differently. So it wasn't as free roaming. You know, the cameras followed very specific paths. You know, so because we couldn't fit all the polygons in on screen. You know, so you know, kind of there was a tool which actually told us when the camera was struggling with a number of polygons. So we had to kind of like be very careful and very mindful of that. And also the fact that, you know, sort of we wanted to control the camera movements to try and create a cinematic feel for that, you know, as best we can. So if somebody, you know, say Nico went down the alley, the camera would follow her in a very specific way to try and maximize the cinematic feel.
Yeah.
And you know, sort of it kind of worked. But one of the things that we did with the backgrounds was that one of the programmers came up with this idea of creating this map, which effectively coloured. It was kind of like a pre-rendered light map to create the you know, sort of the light and the shadows on the backgrounds, and in a very colourful way. So, you know, sort of like the shadow, you know, it was all pre-rendered. Well, the 3D was live, but the shadow map was pre-rendered at a high resolution in order to get like bounce colors, you know, like when the light hits a wall, you get some reflected light. So there was an awful lot of that going on, and it was quite a good effect. You know, sort of it used the technology of the time to great effect to create this, and you know, so but things like the animation, you know, instead of doing George's animation in 8 directions, you only needed to do it in 1, because, you know, the 3D would move him in whatever direction that you wanted to go in. So there were some things that you kind of got some advantage for, because you were, you know, animating in 3D. It was a different approach. You know, you could do an awful lot more. You could put more into things like relaxed poses and, you know, brushing your fingers through your hair and stuff like this. It was, you know, sort of, there was an awful lot more you know, sort of opportunity to do stuff like that. So there were, you know, kind of more expressive stuff going on with George, but there's also other stuff going on which, you know, sort of people wouldn't obviously pick up on, because it was just stuff that you wouldn't think about, like if we had a script, we'd put little markers in the script. So, you know, you'd have George, you know, George's line, Nico's line, maybe Lobino's line, you know, and stuff like this. But then we would put in markers so we could get, you know, so we could say, you know, George head turned towards Lobino,
I get you.
and he'd
Yeah.
kind of turn his head. Or it would be body turn towards Lobino, and then he'd do a complete body turn, and things like this, you see. Or
Yeah.
it could just be an eye movement. That is the level that we were working with,
Yeah.
sort of. And when one character was looking at another, there was kind of like a kind of handle on the eyeballs, so that we could make the eyeballs point at that other character, at that other character's face, so it would look like they were focusing on that other character, which sometimes, some characters look a bit as though they're kind of a bit glassy-eyed, don't they, as though they've got no real focus, But if you actually watch the eyes during a conversation in Broken Sword 3, they really do feel as though they're kind of like watching the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite a good effect. We also created this thing where we could actually overlap speech lines, because in natural conversations you get interruptions and overlaps and stuff like this, and everybody else, including Revolution, would always kind of like, you play a line, it has to stop before you play the next one. And what we didn't want to do, we didn't want to record lines, sort of all, pre-record them overlapping in case, something went wrong. So we recorded them separately, but then we had the ability to kind of say, start this one at -5 seconds, which seems odd, but it would kind of like pre-process the conversation in the engine and work out where all these lines were needed to be queued.
To keep a more kind of organic flow to the conversation between the characters. Yeah, certainly.
So we would play around with these timings of, where these lines. I mean, a lot of the time we didn't do that, but particularly if you're in a conversation that's quite high octane, shall we say, people get angry with each other, they start overlapping, they start interrupting. So it just gave us a lot more, realistic feel.
That reminds me of a scene in Broken Sword 3, actually, where George is in he's in Glastonbury, and he's looking for somebody in particular, and it turns out that this man is Bruno, who was from Broken Sword 1. He was the man in the Hotel Ubu reading the newspaper, kind of being incognito, so to speak. And George pulls him up and he's like, "You're one of the Templars. What are you doing here?" And Bruno was trying to explain things, but the conversation is overlapping, and it's kind of like they're fighting amongst each other in this dialogue, which again, it was very, very organic. It was very, very kind of, it felt real. Do you know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel like there was two actors just reading off a script. And I think that's what Revolution, in a sense, were very revolutionary back when the company was focusing on these titles. It really does feel like you're in this moving, living, breathing world. Nothing is ever stagnant. There's stuff going on in the background that you may not even be aware of, and there's a point in each game where it's presented to you like, this is what's been going on. You are a part of this, whether you like it or not. It's absolutely fantastic. And I know once Broken Sword 3 had kind of had completed its course, coming into 2009, 2010, I know that you were doing some work on The Witcher 2, one of my favorite games of all time, by the way. And you also did the So Blonde title. But when the HD remasters came out for Android, iOS, that kind of thing, did you feel that like the art style had kind of changed a little bit? And what I mean by that is, for example, in Broken Sword 1, when George was on the phone using the payphones dotted around, there's a few of them in Paris, there's one in Ireland in the pub. When he's having a conversation with Nico, so to speak, it'd be the two people, like you would see portraits, and they'd be having a conversation where they're kind of moving back and forth, and their eyebrows might raise and whatever. That's one of my favorite parts, actually, in Broken Sword 1, is just having those phone conversations. It's something so small, but it's done very, very well. When George...
No, go on.
When George is speaking in the HD remasters, his actual portrait would come up and the dialogue would be right beside it. Did you feel like that the art style had kind of changed? Like you were adding in a new art style on top of a pre-existing art style, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know how much I can say without being rude. There were things about like the director's cut of Broken Sword. There were things about that moved away from the original feel of the backgrounds. Didn't quite have that same looseness in the background. It seemed a bit, because of going for much higher resolution, it just felt as though, sort of, it didn't have quite the same feel. But also the portraits. No, I didn't like the portraits, I must admit. They just didn't have the same. If I look back to the original drawings that we had done when we were first, getting concepts for George and Nico, and they were done by some talented guys, a company called Red Rover, I think, if I'm remembering right, and they did some brilliant work, and sort of some great sketches, and you might have even seen them because Chandler shared some of them online, and yet these new portraits didn't have that same energy.
It's a weird one, though, isn't it? It's a weird one. Like, I can understand why the director's cut and the HD masters might add something different into the overall game. Like in the director's cut, you had Nico had her own opening sequence, which leads into her meeting with George. But the portraits that came up when characters were having a dialogue, I don't know what it was. It not that it didn't click, but I rather liked seeing people's dialogues in their own separate colors, so to speak. So when George spoke, it was white text. When Nico spoke, it was kind of like a light purple. When Rosso spoke, it was like an orangey kind of reddish color.
Yeah.
But,
where I think that might be a hangover from was when we did the GBA version of Broken Sword. And, sort of like the characters are so small on screen, you barely see them anyway. So we created the, sort of like some portraits for that, and the text would then appear next to the portrait. And I think that helps, for the GBA because of that, being such a small screen. And so, sort of it just felt as though that was moving, sort of, or rather, sort of it was just natural to do more of the same in the director's cut.
Yeah.
I have very mixed feelings about the director's cut. I like the section with Nico where she's kind of like doing some investigation.
Yeah, she knows a lot about her father as well.
Yeah, I didn't like the fact that it came before George's first section.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because it was kind of like promising that it was Nico's story, and yet it wasn't. It was really George's story.
Yeah, it's the first kind of meeting that Nico has with Khan. Khan is dressed up as a mime, and he kills a French politician. And then the next scene is that he's the clown and he blows the cafe up, and it kind of felt a bit disjointed, to be honest with you.
I suggested Charles, and he didn't quite like the sound. But I thought that you should start with George as normal, and then when George gets to know Nico, she explains why she's investigating, and then you have that section, that Nico section, as a kind of flashback. Something, where she's explaining, but you get to play as her.
Yeah,
but I think that would have been better because it would have maintained that original opening and that feel of as you say, life went on around me kind of thing. But it would have, sort of, we would have still got the new stuff in there with Nico.
Yeah,
which, as I say, it's not a bad section. There are some good puzzles in there. But sort of, I think that, starting with that, personally, I just don't feel it's quite right.
No, I would be inclined to agree with you, because there is that conversation that George and Nico have when George is kind of asking Nico a little bit more about her background, and she says that she had a keen interest in photography, that her father gave her her first camera. All these kind of things where you could have a pretty interesting flashback sequence where you play as Nico, kind of doing that investigation kind of work and things like that. Which I think it would have worked. It's not to say, as you said, like that it was a bad sequence around, but just to have it placed differently in the narrative would have made it flow a little bit more better, in my opinion. But now that Broken Sword is kind of, it ended on the Serpent's Curse there, and I'm not too sure if Broken Sword 6 has been in development or anything like that. I'm not too sure if
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what's actually going to happen, but I'm going to put you on the spotlight right now, Steve. And once again, I cannot stress enough how thankful I am just to even speak to you. I really, truly mean that. It's fantastic to actually have a dialogue with you. And
my head won't fit in my hat, so.
but I'm very thankful, I must say. Broken Sword is the game that got me into narrative-driven games, and when listening to Barrington scores, it's what kind of inspired me to write my own music. So Broken Sword for me is something that I'm very, very passionate about. But I'm going to put you on the spotlight right now, and I just want to know, out of all the Broken Sword games that you have worked on, produced, helped with the script writing, having dialogues with characters, which one is your favorite and why? It's kind of like asking who's your favorite child. It's tricky.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
I am putting you on the spotlight now, so it's a tricky question.
I'm torn between 1 and 3 for different reasons. 1, because it's just such a brilliant game.
Oh, absolutely.
And 3, because I did some writing on it. No, I think ultimately it has to be the first one.
Any particular reason why?
I think because we were breaking such new ground for an adventure game, and probably for games anyway. Sort of, there was nothing that looked like Broken Sword at that time. Sort of, there were lots of people doing adventures. There was, obviously LucasArts and Sierra were 2 huge companies.
Discworld as well was also doing the point and click thing.
Yeah, but nobody, I think, was doing anything like Broken Sword. I mean, the LucasArts games were brilliant, weren't they? But they were more or less, sort of exclusively comedic, apart from, the Indiana Jones ones and the Dig, sort of, I suppose they were less comedic. But
Monkey Island's narrative was actually very enjoyable, I must say.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Sort of, and the humor was brilliant. I mean, one of my favorite games of all time is Day of the Tentacle. I mean, that's just such a brilliant game.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of, I was never a big fan of the Sierra games overall. But I think that's just personal choice. I'm not saying they're bad games. I'm saying that they work for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the first Broken Sword game, sort of, it was going to be just another adventure in many respects, sort of, because we were going to do it at the same resolution as Beneath the Steel Sky, 320 by 240. And we realized that, technology was moving fast enough that we could rethink that. And I think that we made a lot of, revolution, shall we say, made a lot of, sort of bold decisions, bringing in, sort of the Don Bluth guys, and bringing in, sort of proper animators to learn from, that helped, Steve, establish some great stuff with George's animes. And sort of, I don't know, there was just everything. And the fact that we found such a good actor in Rolf, sort of who seemed to just be perfect and slip into that role. Sort of. I remember when we were recording Broken Sword 3. I mean, we're talking, sort of a good few years break, between number 2 and number 3, and he just fell into that role like it was
like meeting an old friend again.
It was, yeah, and it was just a pleasure to work on that, sort of. And so, although I really like Broken Sword 3 for the development side of things, and the fact that I did quite a bit of the writing on it. Sort of is very close, but no, number 1 I think is the best.
Is there any part in Broken Sword 1 that you like, any sequence or location that you favor over anything else?
Ooh, I've never really thought of that. Sort of because
there is a lot going on in Broken Sword 1.
You see, I don't think it's any one particular place. It's lots of things that crop up in little bits. It's sort of like when Sergeant Moo first arrives on the scene at the cafe, and when George is on the weapon screen, and he goes, he pulls out his gun and says, "Freeze." And George says, "Oh, I'm innocent. I'm an American." And he goes,
"Which one is it?
Make up your mind there."
Yeah.
and it's little things like that, and some of the banter between George and Nico, and the fact that Lobino gets a bit, jealous, and sort of a lot of my favorite bits are actually, the character stuff. But you've already pointed out the bit of the bull's head. But then there's also when they're on the train, sort of when Khan gets shot.
That moment is just, you brought up there on the train going to Bannockburn, when Khan is obviously dressed up as an elderly lady and he's carrying Semtex C4 with him, and he gets shot by the Neo-Templar Eklund, and in his dying breath, like, he says to George, "We were always on the same side, just different points of view." And because this man is a member of the Hashashin, and he's a stone cold killer, and his ancestors have been at war with the Templars for decades and centuries, and it was that moment where Khan, he kind of like, he says to George, like, we were always on the same side, just on different viewpoints. I was always trying to help you, even though he tried to kill George a few times, but that was just because George was getting in the way of Khan's ultimate goal, which was to stop the Grand Master in the Bannockburn Cathedral. But you're right, though, like, because especially with Broken Sword 1, and there's so many locations and characters that you meet, like even going into the church in Montfaucon, when you're talking to the priest there, and you look through the scroll that one of the statues is holding, but when you put the lens on that you had gotten from Klausner's body, it's a completely different mural on the stained glass window, and the priest says, "Oh, that's happened before, where people see a man burning at the stake, but like, this is the real thing." But there is so many moments in Broken Sword 1, especially where it's the dialogue between the characters, the environment that you're surrounding yourself in, that's just absolutely brilliant. But I suppose, just to kind of close this video off, and Steve, I know I've said it already, but I can't thank you enough for just taking some time out of your day just to have a chat with me about this. I really do appreciate it. But let's talk a little bit now, before we close this off. What has 2022 have in store for you, Steve? Are you working on any projects at the moment? Have you got some new cartoons coming out, comics and things like that?
Well, yeah. There's sort of like, I've gone in multiple different directions in one sense. I did some work at the end of last year, sort of like leading into the beginning of this year, which was for a children's app about climate change. Called Climate Action. And basically, we're using animal characters So the main two characters are a cat and a dog, a young cat and a dog, sort of like children. And there are problems around the house, sort of like, that are related to climate change. Like they have this fish tank in their room, and they're, it's really filthy, so they haven't been looking after it. And the mother gets angry. And that's the first thing the mother says is, if you don't clean that fish tank, you've got to stay in your room. And, or you're not leaving your room until you clean it up. So they've got to clean the fish tank up. And, sort of, there's a number of steps that they've got to. So it's a bit adventure-like in that sense. But you don't have a full inventory or anything like this. But, sort of, there's a big kind of like climate message. But not just climate, because it's not climate on its own, it's about the environment as well. So it's kind of like saying, the seas, they're drawing a parallel between the fish tank and the seas, you see. So it's kind of like the seas are getting bad because they're warming up, and so less oxygen in the seas and all this kind of stuff. And then there's, sort of like, you get to go in the garden, kind of, and the garden's a mess, so it's not very, nice. You got to grow more, not only will it save you money if you grow vegetables, but, sort of the growing captures carbon and so on.
Yeah.
So there's also, so there's that. And not only did I write and design it, I created all the 2D art as well. So I had a mad 6 months on that. but I loved it,
Yeah.
But it's a little bit in limbo at the moment because the programming team are actually based in the Ukraine.
All right.
So when that kicked off, it put things on hold a bit. And at the moment, the guy who's kind of running the show, he's not sure exactly when it's all going to come together.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully it will be out soon.
Yeah, hopefully so. Hopefully
because,
so.
So we got this environmentalist, a guy called Nick. Oh my God, I've forgotten his surname now. But he does, kind of like videos and, sort of is big in the kind of like environmental world and stuff. And he actually did the voice for this alien character. And the alien character is busy, well, not so much, he doesn't appear, he kind of appears as a kind of like disembodied voice sort of thing.
Okay.
But he's kind of saying, oh, my world, sort of was in such a bad state, and I'm here to kind of try and help you, and, sort of make sure you don't make the same mistakes in your world kind of thing. But obviously we're trying to do it in a non-patronizing way, but Nick knows just so much, so it's, he took the stuff that we wrote and then put it in his own words because, sort of he's so much more of an expert and sort of the way he kind of like redid this just made it work so much better and came across so much more authentic.
Yeah. And even when you're doing those kind of those stories for children, I suppose, not falling into the whole patronizing kind of side of things, like it's delivering a message, but delivering it in a way that like kids aren't stupid,
Yeah, but there's lots for them to do. Like, they have to clear up the garden. They have to, sort of like clear a space for the vegetables, clear a space for the wildflowers to encourage the bees. They have to clean the pond, to encourage wildlife and things like this. So they're actually doing stuff. But so it's not like you just get a screen and somebody goes, sort of this pond is bad, because it's sort of it's not healthy and it won't attract. Well, you've got to make these things sort of change. Kind of like sometimes it's kind of big things like doing the garden, but sometimes it's also about kind of looking after the stuff that you have. So it doesn't, so you don't have to buy new stuff. Things like, oh, there's a broken bike. Come on, let's fix it up. We'll fix this bike, sort of, and we'll put it in the shed so, the rain won't make it rusty. And things like this, sort of, which you may think, hang on a minute, how is that, about the environment? How is that about climate change? But because you're looking after it, you're not buying a new one, which uses up resources, you see. So it's, there are knock-on effects, and it's about that as well. It's not just, nothing is in isolation, you see. So so it's a it's a big thing in a way, as a kids app. But as you say, we didn't want to be patronizing. We wanted to make it something kids would love to just get involved with, really, and make the characters fun, and sort of it's kind of like, you've got to clean that fish tank, so one of them goes, "Oh, Mom, do we have to?" And it's it's kind of like,
Yeah. It's those childhood chores kind of thing, isn't it? It's like, oh, do we have to? But there's a reason, there's a deeper message kind of going on there, which is
so yeah, there's that. And I've been writing books and putting together books and stuff like this. Sort of. I mean, I did these comic strips many years ago, called Mr. Smoozles.
That's right, yeah.
And that was online, and I just thought, oh, I ought to collect these together and put them into a book. And it's actually quite a good, the quality of it is printed up quite nicely. So I'm quite pleased with that. And sort of, it's surprising, kind of how much print on demand has changed. I mean, it used to be quite an expensive way of publishing, but through through Amazon, I can offer that, which is like nearly 200 pages, full color, for $15.99, which sort of isn't bad, really.
That's not bad at all.
Sort of. But then I've written novels. I wrote a urban fantasy novel, which is actually set in York. Most urban fantasy novels seem to be set in American cities or London, but I chose York, and York is quite important to one aspect. One of the characters is actually trapped in York, and has been trapped in York for more than 700 years. And this character is 2,200 years old.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and then there's two main protagonists. This guy who's called Joshua Pope, and his friend is called, oh my God, Fair Bishop. Forgetting my own characters' names. And she's a witch, and she's just over 400 years old. And I've used the fact that Pocklington, which is where I live, is renowned for being the place where the last witch was burned at the stake.
Oh,
in England.
Oh, interesting.
So Bishop is actually that witch in another body. She had but there you go.
Oh wow.
But because they've been around for such a long time, there's an immense sort of potential for stories, kind of. And I wrote quite a number of shorter stories, sort of didn't really do anything with them. But then a couple of them I've incorporated into the novel. It's kind of like flashback areas and stuff.
Yeah.
But I've still got others that I need to kind of incorporate into future novels. So.
Would you ever consider maybe turning that narrative from the book into a game, like what Revolution did? Would that be something you're exploring?
It would work as a game, but whether anybody would want to make it. I'm trying to make my own game.
Oh, cool.
Well, I started doing this comic strip called Crow Girl.
Yeah.
And I started. I got to a certain point, and I thought the next part of the story needs to be a game. I don't know why, but so I've been developing that on and off for a couple of years. And sort of like the backgrounds have a bit of a kind of broken sword feel, but they're much higher resolution. I'm doing all the backgrounds at 4K resolution, and the characters and that are kind of like fit with that. So it's so there's that, and then there's a few children books children's books I've written, and illustrated and stuff like this. Sort of. I've just started work on a game project, but I can't talk about that.
Oh, okay, interesting.
As is the nature of these things. So various things.
You're kept busy. Great. You're kept busy. Well, look, I have really, really enjoyed having this chat with you. We were kind of restricted with technology issues the last time we tried to do this, so I'm really thankful and blessed to have you here. I really, really cannot express my gratitude. I know you're a busy man, so I really, really do appreciate it, Steve. But I think to close off this video now, signing off on the save point, to everybody who has been onto our little YouTube channel and giving the odd comment here and there and interacting with us, myself and my co-host really, really do appreciate it. But for the time being, Steve, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we will see you guys. Hopefully we will see you guys on the next edition of the Save Point. So take care of yourself, guys, and we'll see you later. Thank you again, Steve.